Hi, and welcome to the IAPS 36th Juried Exhibition. And I'm here with Richard McKinley and Red Weber. Richard McKinley is the president of IAPS, and he's going to take us through some of the paintings that are in the show, which is spectacular. It's being held in Dunedin, Florida, and he's going to talk about some of the paintings that are there and give you a little perspective on what's happening with them. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Sabrina, and thank you for doing this. And for those of you that don't know, this is Sabrina Hill. She's president of the Pastel Society of the West Coast and is working with the communications team at IAPS, and we're really fortunate to have her involved in that. So I'm looking forward to this. And Red Weber, thank you for keeping IAPS operating for all of us. So this will be fun. So what we're going to do is, again, kind of a virtual fantasy that we are walking through the exhibition together. And of course, it's a large exhibition. And so I can't address every single painting, but what I want to do in this little chat we're going to have, which is something I enjoy doing, is looking at the diversity of the medium of pastel. So I'm going to be talking quite a bit about the diversification in the medium, having worked in the medium for over 50 years. And what we see now in its progression of where it's going. And so I'm going to try to address different movements artistically, especially in Western art, and how we can see those reflected in modern day pastel, and also how we're pushing the medium maybe into some of the new movements of art. So here we go with the first painting.
Okay, and this is a painting by Olga Abramova. And she is from the National Pastel Society of Russia.
Yeah, and what struck me in the beginning of putting this kind of slideshow of the paintings together is I've selected a few paintings here at the beginning just to set the tone of kind of the major diversification. So again, here we have an international artist of great acclaim. She's doing very well with her art career and obviously is very, very talented. And what struck me in this is about the perspective of the views that we now portray in our work. You know, in classical representationalism, which obviously this is representative, we understand what we're looking at here, but it's an angle that we wouldn't see 100 years ago portrayed. Appears to be apples sitting on a porch. We see sunlight and shade in that reflection. So I was intrigued by the composition and of course the use of the medium, but especially elevating the difference in the perspective of how we look at things. Now, I also thought was really interesting in this image too to note, and this will come up several times, is how high key the painting is. So in mechanical observations, what you notice is except for a few tiny little shadows, there's really nothing below a mid-range value as the darkest dark. So that also communicates a very different appearance to us in this piece. And a very simple color palette, yet we don't feel deprived of color. It's pretty much two complementary colors. It's a yellow, green, and a violet. And except for a few tiny accents of a rose tone, the painting is dominated by a complementary palette scheme.
This piece is by Janice Wall. Her art was also featured on the front cover of the catalog for the show this year. It's called Worlds Apart.
And as one of the wonderful Northwest artists up out of the Seattle area. And so it was interesting that when I saw this painting in the exhibition, it reminded me of something. And obviously that is just what Sabrina mentioned, which is the painting that graces the cover of our catalog that Sabrina was instrumental putting together, which is amazing. And I highly recommend that all of you look at the PDF copy and order a physical copy to keep in your archives. And so it was the subject matter that struck me. I said, I've seen this subject matter before. But in comparing this painting with the painting from the previous show, you see a very, in a way, different expression around that subject matter. This tends to be much more contrasted in color temperature. extremely intensified cools in the shadows, which really goes beyond the norm. So the artist is making an expressive statement in how they're handling their shadows. So this landscape, although again representational, is showing more of an expressive attitude. Technically too, and I can't ever stop not wearing a teacher's hat, it was a real interest in how she got away with such strength in the middle distance. The darkest darks are back there, the strongest edges are back there, and yet we don't have a feeling of not being grounded in the foreground. So the artist is really masterfully, through the use of linear perspective and a few angled lines and a little bit of intense color temperature in the foreground, still giving us a sense of depth, but we absolutely know what our area of interest is. So a very expressive landscape at this point.
This piece is by Jo McGinness, and she is, it's called Tide's Edge, and she's with the Pastel Society of Tampa Bay.
Well, this piece really struck me because it's not a technique that I work in. And I just like to share that, you know, we're all different. Some artists tend to live a little bit in their own box and really appreciate what appeals to them artistically. I've always been very small c Catholic about art. I enjoy all the movements. And this artist's work is exceptional photorealism. And, you know, trends come and go in art, but an artist is meant to work in the attitude and the style and the way that they're meant to work. That's their voice as an artist. And so in this piece, I think it just portrays exceptional photorealism.
Mm-hmm.
Now, beyond that technical skill, and this is always something that must come into consideration in jurying and judging, is again, it can be a subject matter you're not drawn to, or even a style of painting you're not attracted to, but we have to honor those technical merits. And photorealism always shows probably the greatest aptitude in the use and the ability of drawing value, edges, color, air and space. But what I really liked about this piece too is that the subject matter is making us pause and think. You know, we all have enjoyed maybe a moment at the beach and you get to walk and be introspective and quiet, and the sounds, which we can now kind of hear in our imagination when we look at this piece.
Mm-hmm.
But the artist has paused and made us look down towards our feet. So we feel grounded and in this lovely moment of just patterns and designs and rocks and the stones. This can communicate on many levels, not so much because of the style and the way it's painted, but by what is painted. And so that is absolutely one of the elements that we appreciate in art.
This piece is by Nancie King Mertz. She's actually a member of our society, but she's also a member of the Chicago Pastel Painters, and it's called Passing Fancy.
Well, and you know, so many of these artists, I feel very fortunate and blessed to say are friends, and you know their work over years and who they are as an artist. And when you put the person to the artwork, it makes even more sense. And of course, Nancie lives downtown Chicago. Much of her work is informed by urban scenes. What I really loved in this, beyond Nancie's competence as a kind of impressionistic, expressive painter, very bold, she does a lot of plein air work, often very sketchy. These often lead to pieces later on back in her studio. Sometimes they're just masterpieces on their own. Is the perspective of, again, looking differently at that scene. So we see this more modern attitude brought to, again, what could be classic subject matter. Urban scenes have been painted from the urbanization of London, Paris, followed into New York and all the major capitals of the world. This piece really struck me though, because of looking down, what the content is, but then to notice the artist had the courage to put things compositionally, like the bicyclist leaving the scene, the shadow pulling us to a corner. You're always told, don't lead the viewer out, don't have anything going to the corner. And so I guess in a way, something echoing from a mentor that I had years ago is a master can break the rules and get away with it. And so we have to learn those rules and understand why they can be awkward to use. But the real maestros out there in painting pull it off and learn from that. And this piece is a perfect example of that.
Absolutely. This piece is by Liz Haywood-Sullivan, who we all know so well. It's called Passing By, and she's with the Pastel Society of America.
And so what I'm doing in this segment is something I never do in judging, and I don't, in fact, I kind of admonish people to not segregate by subject matter in looking at art. But for the sake of comparison, again, in styles and history of art and where artists are pushing their work, what I ended up doing is putting together a body of kind of landscaped work, and then we'll go through some figurative portrait work and some abstract work and still life work right to the conclusion. So here beginning the body of landscape, and like Sabrina graciously said, and Liz was the previous president of IAPS, and those have been big shoes to fill on my part. It's just an amazing artist. I mean, I remember seeing her first painting on a painting trip that I took decades ago up to Taos, and it just burned, that image burned in my mind. To me, Liz's work speaks to the best of design. It's always there, and she likes to use value very boldly, as other artists do, something I don't put into my own work, so I really appreciate that a lot in her work. And it's just a beautiful classic design. The V of the water pulling us over, but then counterbalanced by those clouds. And it sets a mood and a tone. I think what's really good to do when you look at artwork, whether you end up really liking it or not, you know, and everybody says, oh, I know what I like and I don't like, is say, how does it make you feel? You know, it's like music. And this piece really pauses us again. It's a piece that you enjoy looking at. It's not dramatic in sensational ways, and yet the drama and the sense of power is definitely in this piece.
Mm-hmm. This piece is by Phil Bates, and it's called Across the River. Phil is with the Pastel Society of Oregon.
Yeah, and Phil, another longtime friend, and it's been really interesting to watch Phil's development as an artist and his strengths, which are numerous. You know, it's always that thing, anyone can be taught how to paint, but what we have to do is learn to acquire our own voice in painting. And so I loved putting these two paintings next to each other, kind of coming off of Liz's into Phil's, because we see much the same things. Good design, nice power, we know where we're meant to look. But Phil loves color, you know, and so many artists will mention that when they talk about their work, is the joy of color. Color's like a dessert to us visually. It's stimulating, it's exciting, it's motivating. So when artists elevate color for the sake of color, we walk away with that almost sweet sensation of putting something in our mouth that has that quality to it. Yeah. But it can be tricky to pull off, because color just for color's sake can also be obnoxious. You know, it can be saccharine and too sweet, and we don't enjoy it. So it's almost like watching a baking show, you know, what is the one from England right now, the British baking show that's so popular. And they'll do a dessert, and I love the judges will talk about, you know, it's just the right amount of sweetness for this dish. And that's what I love to celebrate in Phil's work. Now, I also want to just point out to people how much power a good conductor can have in their work. You know, you're meant to look at the light hitting those rocks on the shoreline and those few little dots of light glinting off leaves. That could have easily been overdone in this painting, and that would have, again, elevated the sweetness to becoming more of a postcard. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the only thing I'll share, and again, Phil's a good friend, and it's something I was told by a master, was be careful of Candyland at times. And this is a good example of Phil orchestrating those things brilliantly. So if you love color, pay attention to how Phil handled it.
This piece is by Lynda Conley, and it's called Sunshine Farm, which it certainly looks like sunshine. She's with the Pastel Society of the Southwest.
Well, again, a beautiful piece, longtime friend. It's always fun to see artists and see their growth. And to me, when I see Lynda's work now, I see her maturing in the landscape in her own voice in a way that what she's elevating for her audience more and more is color temperature. And I've found in a lot of her recent work over the past just several years, this almost elevation, again, orchestration of color temperature, the play of shadow and light, a very high key painting again, so we feel the heat and the temperature in this scene. It's not overtly representational, so through color temperature, we see this wonderful elevation of mood. And that's what leads to paintings being different than just being a competent rendition of a scene or reference material that we have. So I thought this really portrayed the use of color temperature in the landscape in a beautiful way. And a wonderful handling of foreground. Very simple, but again, we know where we are. We know what's lying back behind.
Exactly. This is a piece by Carol Strock Wasson. It's called Last Light, and she's with the Chicago Pastel Painters.
Well, what instantly hit me with this is something that right now I'm enamored with, and I've gone through many phases over the decades and hope if I live a lot longer to continue to become enamored with different movements in art as an appreciation, is tonalism. And tonalism for a long time when I was young was associated with gray paintings. You know, we thought, oh, paintings lacking color are tonalist. And really, tonalism means a sense of air and space, everything belonging in just a perfect sense. Everything in that scene exists because of the unification of air and atmosphere. Now, not that that doesn't play in every other type of work, it does. But in tonalism, it's something really special. You almost feel that quality of being just present again in that moment, in that unification. This is a very high key painting again. And I love how artists that work very high keyed, like Olga's, and we just saw even with Lynda Conley's piece, there is that elevation to the audience again of light, of this almost halcyon quality of light when we're outside. So this piece to me just really spoke to, again, what can be accomplished using the tenets of some of the best of tonalism as a movement.
This piece is by Tom Heflin. It's called Tree Line.
Very much the same comments I just made. I mean, I adore this piece on a very personal level. And it kind of wraps up several of the things I've said. Tom has elevated color. We can see from the notes of emerald green, the quality of the reds, even that wonderful almost sapphire blue that's echoed in the field, as well as in the distant hills. So there's a subtle elevation of color. There's also this wonderful tonal sense of unification of light and space and air. But then in this painting, you also get to a wonderful lyrical movement. And compositionally choosing to paint this in this exaggerated oblong makes us feel this almost sweeping sense to the landscape. We experience it differently visually. We all enter the format of our painting, whether it's square, rectangle, upright rectangle, or an oblong. And that sets a mood again. It makes us feel just like the old cowboy westerns of my youth when they went to Panavision, of this big wide open sense. I also really admire his ability in edges. And this is something I struggle with. I tend to noodle and doodle too much edges and clarify things. And look at those trees. And there's not a hard edge on those trees, but none of us stop and say, what's wrong with the trees? Why are they fuzzy? Why are they blurry? So again, we feel air and space and volume. And this is a tool in representationalism that can really communicate on a human level. On a flat surface of paper, we feel volume in a way that we would not if it was overly photographically rendered. So masterfully done.
Beautiful. This piece is by Jennifer Hoffman, and it's called Resplendence. And she's with the Pastel Society of America.
So again, just a total ton of great classicism coming together in this artist piece. It represents kind of the finest of romantic representationalism, you know, a scene that we would all enjoy looking at, making us pause for a moment, but such skill. The mountains aren't razor sharp. The trees in the field really struck me because, again, Richard would have overstated those trees, and that would have taken away a lot of the kind of musical intensity of the light source and those few little sparkles down on the earth. Yeah. And so that musical connotation is another one I love to use. Some paintings are very dramatically symphonic, you know, it can be Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, so to speak. And then other classical paintings can be much more like a quiet little Chopin piece or Debussy. And there's little lingering notes that lyrically thread through the piece. So this could easily be a very dramatic symphonic piece, but the artist has also chose to give us those lingering little moments that we walk away remembering. And you know, bravo.
This piece is by Jane McGraw-Teubner. I hope I say her name right. And it's called Crescendo.
Yeah, Jane's an artist I met a couple decades ago on the East Coast. And, you know, again, fabulous professional artist. I've always enjoyed seeing Jane's work over the years, longtime member at Salomon Gundy Club, and as well as PSA and many of the organizations. But when I saw this piece and realized it was Jane's, what I was struck with is that we as landscape painters really do represent what we want to convey to our public, but we also reflect what we know. And it's always fun to travel. I mean, I've been, again, very blessed and fortunate to have experienced many things I never dreamed in my wildest dreams I would experience. But home, away from those scenes, after a few weeks, I become that Northwest painter again. It's the light I know, it's the seasons I know, it's the color palette I know. And this is so profoundly the East Coast. You know, you study the work of Winslow Homer, you study the work of Frederick Waugh, the great marine painters of that area, or if you've spent time along the Atlantic, we can talk about those differences here in the United States between the Pacific coast and the Atlantic. We can both have storms, but there's nothing like a nor'easter in the wind on that Atlantic and the color palette of the water there and the temperatures and the rocks and things. And this just all comes together. I mean, this is the best of New England maritime painting and done in pastel. This would stand toe-to-toe with the best of those oil masterpieces in museums throughout the United States and world.
Exactly. This is a piece by Karen Margulis, and it's called Look Toward Tomorrow. And she's with the Southeastern Pastel Society.
Karen, another longtime friend, legendary teacher. I mean, Karen has been such a help to so many artists, inspiring them to paint and be expressive. And Karen's a very tactile painter. The times that I've been able to paint with Karen, I might be big, tall, loud, and obnoxious and bold, and yet I paint very profoundly slowly, very quiet and slow, and my tactile hand is much more drawn across the surface. It's not quite as slashy and mark making in that way. And Karen, this very quiet, polite lovely little lady really has a very bold hand and works very quickly. Karen reminds me of something. We all have to figure out who we are as an artist. So I need to meditate into my scene and kind of dance with it. Karen spends her time with the scene and then responds. And I just will share a story with a group. There was almost a guilt she felt in a group participation where we were painting one time, because she said, I work too quick. I know I should slow down. And I looked at her and I said, no, that's who you are. You need to own that. You get 5 paintings done in the time that the rest of us might get 1. And so you need to work that way. And I think that's a wonderful thing to remember, is we can admire the people's work we love, we can emulate them, but we also at the end of the day have to find our comfort zone as a painter. Exactly. And Karen really has, and she's matured now into that artist. So I also would just share that what we see here is landscape now becoming a little more our time in painting. You see a bit of the Bavara painting, the bold painting that came out of the previous century, but applied with our color sense and our aesthetics of today, even in representational work.
This piece is by Asselta, and it's called From Rock to Wood, and she's with the First Coast Pastel Society.
Well, Lyn's another artist whose work I always enjoy seeing, and she has a style that's pretty recognizable. You know, you really don't need to look for signatures over time, because you recognize who that artist is. And Lyn really does have her own hand and style, and it always comes through. Her work is also almost always somewhat introspective. It can be very bold, like this piece, very strong, and made up of a lot of contrast, but there's also a sense of being pulled back and being a bit introspective about what is lingering back in that light way in the distance. So I enjoy Lyn's mark making. She utilizes various forms of kind of underpainting, whether it be with pastel or it may be occasionally some mixed media. But Lyn's mark making is something that I always walk away with. Now, I'd also note in this piece is how she pulls off that bold use of cool colors in the shadows. And I know I mentioned that earlier in some pieces. And what we know mechanically and scientifically is shadows can never have more chromatic or saturation of color than where there is light. But a painting can still be very representational, and an artist can choose to elevate, orchestrate, be dramatic in that theatrical way in a painting to communicate to their audience. And so, you know, again, bravo to these artists that stand up and they take the script that's in front of them in the landscape and then deliver it with that diversity that we do see in acting. How many great actors have read Hamlet or Lady Macbeth roles to us over time? Yet each one brings something different in their pausing and their emphasis and the way they deliver that script. They don't change the wording, but they deliver it in a way that we associate it to that actor. So as artists, there's a bit of that in us when we really take representational scripts and we deliver a performance. So this piece represents that to me.
This piece is by Mike Kolasinski, and it's called Spot On, and he's with the Chicago Pastel Painters.
What just, again, struck me with this is what I've been alluding to about breaking rules. And it's just so much fun. You know, laws are not meant to be broken in representationalism. You can't alter perspective and say, well, that's the way I wanted it to be. You become an expressionist, and that's fine, or an impressionist. But if you're going to be really representational, you have to follow the laws, the optic laws of how humans see our relationship to the earth. I mean, all those things come into play. But rules can be broken. And I just think this is a joyous color,
Yeah.
rule-breaking expression. I mean, yes, I mean, I see violet in the landscape everywhere atmospherically, known for my love affair with violet. We go way back, Violet and I. But here the artist has really saturated that violet and then played with that green again, and then had that pop of light back there coming through the forest. So we see a scene, if it had been painted classically, would have still been beautiful and enjoyable, but the artist has said something to us. They've expressed a voice or an attitude that one person might say, oh, I don't like those colors. And somebody like me just stops and goes, wow, what a joy to see this artist elevating that. So break the rules, just don't break the laws.
This piece is by Eveline Miller, and I'm sorry, I don't, for some reason, oh, the title is Coastal Light. I just love this.
Yeah, well, and you know, again, I know I keep saying this, but I've known Eve a long time, and it's just been wonderful to watch her maturing into who she is. And I'm very fond of her work. I don't work a lot with the same color palette and elevate even textural qualities and minimal qualities as much as her, but it's always a moment that just makes me pause and enjoy. And having that memory, you know, this is something that even if you don't know artists personally, if you can study their work either digitally or through books and things over time, you watch this evolution in who they are. You know, none of us live frozen in time. And artistically, we really should not produce just the exact same thing over and over and over again. That's product. And if you're not evolving and reaching, then you're not growing as an artist. And what I notice in Eve's work, and I see it in this piece especially, is more and more economy, the same joyous use of color who she is. Her familiarity with these marshes, because it's again an area where she lives, she paints it daily. So there's this almost internal memory, this deja vu that she brings back to that subject every day when she's painting. And that's now led to a confidence of less is more. Those couple little dots in the foreground. You know, the great legend to a lot of us pastelists, Dwayne Wakeham, who's a great friend, and I love teasing Dwayne and Dwayne but I've learned so much from him over time and love to quote him. And one day I was showing him a painting of mine in an exhibit, and I said, you know, I candidly, you know, what do you think? And he looked at me and he said, I love this. He goes, Richard, it's a good painting, but so many little marks and dots. You don't need all those, you know. And we both laughed, and I said, I know, Dwayne, but I just can't stop myself from making those little marks. So I look at Eve's painting and I go, Richard, look, you know, how many little marks does she have in that foreground? And yet it's all there. Dwayne is right. So listen to Dwayne.
Yeah. This wonderful piece is by Randye Jensen. It's called Bathed in Garnet, and she's with the Pastel Society of America.
Well, I know Randye well, and we've painted together many, many times, and she's another one that I could reference. I sound like this old man who has known all these wonderful artists way too long. But what I see in this piece is a confidence now of, again, this evolution in the landscape of portraying what she wants to portray, which is ever so close to abstraction. You know, in this bridge between representationalism and abstraction. And there are many movements in abstraction, and abstract artists could take objection to what I'm saying because abstract can have a completely different content, but yet the landscape is made up of many of the same design elements that are utilized in abstract. They're just really simplified to a point that it becomes non-objective. Now, this is objective in that many of us could look at this piece and we're going to decide what it is. You know, is it a setting sun over a marsh? Is it, am I in an airplane above the clouds and seeing the play of light above the cloud? You know, whatever it is, and we can reach for that. And some people may need that, or we can also just experience it for its beauty in design and its power in communicating to us. I think it's exciting because it challenges us to not be too literal again, and then make it what you want it to be. Use your own imagination. My greatest mentor, Margaret Stahl-Moyer, told me the greatest challenge after years of her critiquing me and guiding me was, she said, put a little mystery in the piece. Engage your audience. If you tell them everything, why would they want to come back to it? So there you go.
So we're moving into some florals now. And this piece is by Lyn Diefenbach. It's called Rapt in Red, and she's with the Pastel Society of Australia.
Yeah, and what you see in all of Lyn's work is, again, just absolute, 100% amazing technical ability. And so I'm always just in awe of her dexterity with the medium of pastel. You know, I mean, any of us can hold a stick of pastel, of, you know, close to pure pigment in our hand, and it can be messy, it can be awkward, and then when you see work of this refinement, you go, man, this person has technical abilities and control that is like fine watchmakers of the past. So I always love that about her work, and in this piece, I also really enjoyed the composition. Phenomenal movement, counterbalance, a fulcrum balance within it, and then how focus is used to elevate that counterbalance again within the composition. And these close-ups of flowers, which are not classically done 100, 200, 300 years ago in representational art, also become, in a way, a mini bridge to abstraction, because most of us do not sit for long periods of time this close to what's there. So as realistic as it is, it also communicates in a different way.
In this piece, these flowers are by Karen Israel. It's called Haute Couture, and she's with the Pastel Society of America.
So these two being next to each other is a bit of what I did before, is to counterbalance. This is more classical representationalism, although again, very close-up flowers. So what you see in Karen's piece here is, again, a very beautiful composition. This could be compared to the previous painting. Wonderful counterbalance, good focal use in elevating that design and compositional element. But the use of edges in this piece, and that little bit more painterly hand that we see in the height of kind of a John Singer Sargent and Zorn and Sorolla and those magnificent artists, and how they utilized edge, speaks a bit more in that classical sense. And so this is a wonderful piece to compare to the previous piece in seeing how it can be done with similar subject matter.
This piece is by Carol Hall. It's called Summer Bouquet, and she's with the Pastel Society of America. Beautiful piece.
Yeah. Now we see ourselves progressing again in kind of that timeline that I like to reference a bit of. Here we see the Impressionists starting to happen. You know, we come out of great refinement and classical realism, which can be, again, very loose in its painting. But what the Impressionists, over their long period, anybody who studies classical French Impressionism, which we always kind of base back to and then compare other, whether it's Russian Impressionism or Scandinavian Impressionism or American Impressionists too, is that benchmark of French Impressionism on the world stage, is we see this joyous elevation of light. And through the broken application, whether it's paint, pastel pigment, whatever you're doing, we see that fragmentation as a way of elevating that joy. And this piece, to me, speaks to that natural progression that happened in Western representationalism, from classic realism to kind of a more impressionistic hand. I also really appreciated that this artist, working in a square format, and I've alluded to different formats communicate differently, but chose to really allow the top and the sides of the flowers to go out of the composition and to not be completely contained. And that is a strong thing to do in a composition. It elevates content beyond subject matter.
This wonderful piece is by Nancie Nowak, and it's called Sunlit Flowers. She's with the Southeastern Pastel Society.
Well, and we're very fortunate to have Nancie on the board of directors at IAPS and to get to work with her. And she's just a joyous person. And you see her personality so expressed in her work. I always make this statement about Nancie's work, which I adore, is to me, and all of this conversation is really one man's opinion, and it's worth exactly what I'm being paid, nothing. So you're merely getting somebody's perspectives, take it or leave it. Nancie's like the best of an impressionist mindset. The use of fragmentation, the joyous painterly quality which she brings to her applications of pastel. And so I've seen mostly her landscapes and her waterscapes and some cityscapes and things. So to recently see these more floral orientated, obviously done outside in natural light, which is a completely different bridge to indoor lighting. Same thing occurs in portraiture. It just marvelous. And without that little note of red at the top, the design falls apart. So nicely done.
This piece is by Joe Baker, and it's called Progression, and he's with the Connecticut Pastel Society.
Well, Joe's another one, fortunately. I would not have known this was Joe's work. And that's not to say that Joe doesn't have the capability of working in a variety of styles and expressing himself. But I see it, an evolution, a recent evolution, a maturing and a confidence in his voice of moving in kind of an expressionistic, little impressionistic, expressionistic way, tiptoeing more and more towards abstraction in a lot of his work. And this piece really represents that. Again, on close inspection, we all start attempting to figure it out. We say, oh, I see a vase, I see stems, I see flowers, I see. Yes, you might. You might not. But what you see is a joyous expression around light and color and movement. And those non-objective tenets, which is what I bring back to the elements of design. Elements of designs are not objects. They're not a tree or a rock or a cloud. And it's why when somebody says, tell me how to paint a cloud, and I go, well, it's the same as painting a tree and a rock. They're vastly different objects, but the way we paint them is the same. Shapes, edges, values, colors, markment, those are the elements of design. And this piece is just gorgeous in the use of the elements of design.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful piece. Okay, this piece is by Carol Peoples, and it's called Still With Me. And she's with the Pastel Society of America. It does beautiful portrait work.
So now moving into this kind of portrait figurative section, again, not in saying, like I just said, that painting a still life or a landscape would be different than painting a figure. It's that through comparison, we have some things to learn. And Carol's an artist who, from the first time I saw her work, I knew she had a very classic style, could be associated to the height of the highest Western academies, whether Italian, French, and so on. Yet she has an identity that is so strong in her work. Mm-hmm. She so often, and this piece classically shows this, one, tremendous competence, drawing ability, edges, color unification, the use of light. I mean, all these strengths and powers, those are the things that fuel what we can do in a painting, the engine of painting. But in what she portrays, it's very interesting. You know, she's from the New Orleans area, so she has a rich culture there. There's a lot of classicism. I mean, even in this young lady, we see in the clothing almost something maybe slightly Renaissance, something classic, the long, beautiful golden hair that would be so associated to the height of the Italian Renaissance, the architecture in the background, yet she's holding a phone, it appears. You know, so Carol often has these subtle little things within her subjects that also associate it to the time we're living in.
Yes.
And I really love that in her work, beyond all of her competence in painting, to also see this person kind of time capsuling us to, but we're here now, but we come from all of this.
Right.
We are all part of that evolution in DNA.
Beautiful. This piece is called Maestro, and it's from Glenn Perry, and he's with the Philippine Pastel Artists Incorporated.
Well, it was a joy when I had selected this piece, and then I discovered that it was from one of our International Society members. And the Philippines, we got to meet a few of them at the previous convention. And it, you know, it's just so rewarding to see pastel now in kind of the playground of the world, elevating, and that IAPS can provide at times that ability to pull us all together. We often joke about the family reunion. And so it's like I now feel like we have some distant cousins in the Philippines that are excited about pastel.
Mm-hmm.
What struck me in this piece that I enjoyed it was the difference in what we see in the previous piece. Very classically done. Drawing ability right to the point of what Carol has in her piece, yet more of a utilization of the paper, a bold attitude around the clothing in the background, really saying, this is not what's important. Look at the person looking at you. And any time as a figurative portrait artist, you have them looking out of the center of your composition, they are looking at us, no matter where we are in a room or space. So the one thing we know with living objects is we look into, you know, the windows, the soul, into the personality. And the title, Maestro, you know, I can imagine this is maybe a previous art teacher or a mentor to this person who's been their master that they paid such attention to. And so you see this disciplined figure who is reminding them of certain things. And I just thought it struck so many interesting chords in that way.
Here's another portrait. This is from Susan Kaczynski, and it's called Captain Tim. And she's with the Pastel Society of Oregon.
Yeah, Susan's piece hits me with this in that, I know Susan's work, and some conjecture here, but I'm pretty convinced this was done from a live model in a group that she meets with frequently, which is a good way of keeping ourselves tuned up, our studio self tuned up. Go out and paint the landscape on location, whether you finish or not, work with the model. It keeps our dexterity as a visual artist in tune. And I think it just all came together for her in this moment. Very loose, very bold, probably done more as, again, here's a session with a model, I'm gonna do my work, but you take away the desire to produce your award-winning painting when you work that way. If every time we step to the easel, we're planning on having our prix de pastel painting winning great painting, we're actually putting pressure on ourselves in that performance, and we're not playing the game, and often not to the best of our ability, because playing the game is a bit like tennis. It's hitting the ball at 90 miles an hour coming at you. And if every single time I do it, I'm center court Wimbledon with the queen in the stands watching what I'm doing, I'm adding pressure. And my best game often happens when I'm just playing the game and I'm responding. And this portrait piece exemplifies that to me. It just all comes together very spontaneously and very serendipitously. So again, well done.
Well done. This piece is by Sally Strand, and it's called Essay, and it's just a beautiful piece.
Yeah, isn't it? I mean, Sally's one of our legends, and you know, it's such an honor to have had her out there as long as she's been working in pastel. Was a hero of mine early on. Not that we're that different in age, but I didn't meet her until later in life. And Hall of Fame, Pastel Society of America Hall of Fame artist. And I see Sally, one, we know that anybody that knows Sally knows her connection to light. And there's probably nobody better in a scientific way that has taught herself to see the subtle nuances of the quality of light. And everything we do in painting, in every style, genre, and so on, is given to us as a gift because of light. Without light, there would be total darkness and thus nothing. So the deeper we go into it, the more that we can express. And in this piece, it's all there. From the white window in the back to the handling of the whiter garments and document in the front, only reflecting the quality of light and the color temperature of light. A bold composition, allowing the top of the head to go out, the intimacy of the face down with very little detail. Yet none of us are going, why isn't the nose more defined and why don't I see the eyelashes and all that? And then a few spontaneous dashes, those little highlights on the sunglasses, the pen or stylus that she's holding, the mark making, the gestural hatching in places speaks to, again, a painter. It's not overly rendered. You know, I mean, this is a showstopper of a piece.
Absolutely. This piece is by J.Z. Zhu, and it's called Indian Waiter. He's with the Pastel Society of America.
Well, J.Z. Zhu's work hit in the pastel world visually for me, and I'm always trolling the art magazines, the art books, and now the internet, and we all just enjoy seeing everything. And again, we don't always meet the artist. So all of a sudden I saw this work. It was so different. And it just popped out. I mean, there are these things that you just kind of stop and you go, whoa, you know, that's different. And for some classical artists of a certain generation, it almost frightens them, you know, because we go out of a belief in how it's supposed to be done. You know, but it's supposed to be done this way. And I always love, and this may be a bit of my perverse nature, and it's the way my mind even thinks. I always play the devil's advocate, even in painting. So when somebody says it's supposed to be done this way, I go, I didn't get that memo. You know, who says that it's supposed to be? So when I saw Jay-Z's work, it was a real stop me in my tracks, and I went, he's breaking so many rules. And again, I went back and I went, and that's exciting. And then I met the man, you know, and again, a very kind, sweet, generous, gregarious fellow. His personality comes through in his work. I think he's reaching. I think, in my opinion, again, as maybe unhumble as it might be at times, he's wanting us to think different. He's wanting us to look at the world differently. And so we know what this is, an Indian man in a cultural setting, probably from the clothing and the background items, the other figure that's there. But just this joyous expression of diversity in the work. And so I don't work this way. I will probably never work this way in my life. I'm a bit more of a romantic in what I choose to paint. My style isn't this style. But God, Jay-Z's work always stops me dead in my track, whether it's oil or pastel. So that's the diversity, the smorgasbord of pastel right in front of you.
Exactly. We're moving into some abstracts now. This is by Bree Crowell, and it's called In the Wild Sunday, and she's with the Piedmont Pastel Society.
You know, what's fun here, and I alluded to this in the past a bit, and early on I was, you know, youth can be so judgmental at times, and then we kind of evolve. And the old line, which is so true, I knew everything when I was 18, and now at this age, I know nothing. And I had a lot of those prejudices when I was young in painting. I remember even telling Margaret, I just didn't understand all this fuss about Vincent van Gogh. You know, it's all wrong, his paintings and stuff. And she said, just wait, you're going to figure it out. And it was the same with abstract, because I was grasping for a reasoning that I wasn't quite capable of digesting at that time. And that has happened to me personally with food. Things I abhorred as a child, I now adore, older. And one of the bridges that can help in abstract, and again, I'm not advocating a movement, but I'm saying this can be a great bridge to a lot of people, is taking natural form, vegetation, the landscape. Anybody who's flown in an airplane and looked down in the Midwest and seen the patterns elevated, the movement in mountains when you fly over them, it's a vision, it's a relationship we don't have when we're on the ground. And all of a sudden you see it differently, and you start seeing that there's something there that can reach to non-objective abstraction. And this is a perfect piece for that. You see even in the title, instinctually we get a feeling of vegetation, botanical, but we see it differently. And we see it again in a more elevated sense of mark making, rhythm, texture, movement, gesture, beyond just classical botanical representational. So it's a perfect introduction into a bit of an abstract thought.
This piece is by Corey Golette, and it's called My Oyster, and he's with the Pastel Society of America.
Yeah. Again, this just takes that bridge one step further. Mm-hmm. And I will say here with great humility, I'm really not someone to speak to the greatest tenets of abstraction. It's not my wheelhouse. I appreciate, I love the museums of modern art, and as I've hopefully shared a little bit, what I walk away with is challenging myself to look and think differently, strengthen my compositions, look at content, to sometimes be a little unnerved. I don't think everything always has to reach to the undefinable word of pretty. One of the greatest challenges we can have in art is to find beautiful. You know, when, I won't take a lot of time here, but when you realize that you have somebody like Rembrandt, whose work we all, just saying his name, we see paintings. Mm-hmm. When he painted the carcass of a dead piece of beef hanging in a locker, and it's so beautiful, you know there's something in beauty that goes beyond pretty. And so this piece again speaks to the use of texture and technique. And here what I see in pastel is, you know, we can look at the bubbles down here, you know, however that was created, that rhythm and texture, and repeated here and repeated in this section, and mark making and color repetition and texture and things. It is what it is. And to me, it's beautiful.
It is. It's beautiful. This lovely piece is by Hala Shafi, and it's called Village by the River.
And Hala is an Egyptian artist. It's great fun to see her participation in like the PSA events and the bigger events, West Coast and so on, and IAPS at times and things, and to see that bridge from a vastly different ancient culture. And so when I see this piece, and I've always been a big fan of Hala's work, I see that bridge in that almost cultural way of the influences that are in her DNA being from that region, and what she's experienced from the child first opening her eyes is pulling it back for us. You know, we can see that in anything. If we talk about China, or we talk about Asian rugs and patterns, and the diversity between Pakistan and India and China in those even patterns and designs and regions. And I see that in this piece. I mean, when it popped up, I went, this has to be Hala's work. This absolutely represents that. And even in its great abstraction. And I can see this as a scene of Cairo. Again, if I need to connect it for the sake of rationalization, a view from an airplane looking down, or again, it's just what it is. Beautiful patterns, beautiful design, exciting piece.
This piece is by Karen O'Brien, and it's called Watermelon Waltz.
Well, and the next two pieces is really kind of fun for me. What really struck me in this piece is everything I've already said, so I don't need to repeat it about abstraction. I'm kind of a broken record, and like I said, I'm really not any form of an expert in any form of abstraction to speak with any credentials, except what I've learned to appreciate. So this piece represents all those appreciations. What struck me, though, was the color palette. And I was really intrigued by it, and especially when then compared to the next piece.
I love this piece. It's by Gigi Hoare-Liverant, and it's called Hotel Room.
Yeah. See, I've seen a few of Gigi's work, especially in the PSA exhibits and in the pages of the Pastel Journal. And I knew that Gigi had a voice as an artist in what she paints. And again, her use of color, I mean, electric, right? I mean, way beyond classic representationalism. But here we see a scene that we absolutely can recognize. We know we're in an interior. We see light coming through a window. We see the shadow of a figure with a clutched arm that may be holding the phone, saying goodbyes, or I will be home soon, or whatever that communication is that we bring. And so in a way, a very Edward Hopper quality, a kind of a vacuumous room, spatially orchestrated to communicate the way Edward Hopper evolved as an artist. But this electric color, which speaks right back to this beautiful abstraction that we see in Karen's piece, but here we see it applied to something representational. And so in conclusion, in this chapter here, what I see in this progression now, and who knows, I've never had a crystal ball. Absolutely don't. Much more of a retrospective personality in Richard McKinley. But if I had a crystal ball, I would say that I think we're moving into a contemporary attitude now, which is becoming this kind of mixing together of all of these movements of art up till this time, and not knowing where it's going to lead and what it portrays in the time that we're now living in, may be this complete combining, and it becomes a very contemporary attitude. From Carol Peebles' young lady holding a phone to what abstract art compared to representationalism can give us in techniques and attitude and impressionism, to what we are now portraying on a psychological level using all those tenets. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into, and I'm going to be really, really indulgent. And it isn't that I had favorites. I don't. I try not to with my own painting. Every single painting in this exhibit and every single painting entered in the IAPS show is an artist's child. And the great responsibility that we have in acting as a juror and a judge, and we had these amazing people who did this, and you can hear that in the interview that we did with them, and take that responsibility at heart, is they realize that they're looking at people's children, that each one of us took a chance. You know, it really takes courage to put a mark down on a piece of paper as much as it does to write down your story and put it out in the world, or to put on a performance and wait for the audience's response. So knowing that and saying that, I really want to honor and congratulate everybody who took a chance. If you were rejected, we all go through it as we share. I get plenty of that rejection and keep moving forward courageously. Those of you were accepted, congratulations. Those of you that won awards, good for you. You know, put your award to good work, and that acknowledgement is nice. So I didn't have favorites, but I had a few pieces that really stood out to me for various reasons beyond what I've talked about. And this piece, and I sadly don't remember the artist's name, so Sabrina?
I will inform you because of
Okay.
course you know him, Stan Bloomfield. And this is called Autumn Impressions. And he's with the Pastel Society of America. He also belongs to our organization, Pastel Society of the West Coast, and his work is stunning as always.
Yeah, yeah. And once you said the name, I made the connection, because what has happened with Stan's work for me over the years is I'm always so attracted to his work that I pay no attention to the signature. And yet I can recognize the similarity in the work.
Mhm.
I think this painting brings it all together for me. It's a classic scene in landscape, the beauty of cascading water down over boulders and rocks. It has a more fall feeling because of the color palette up in the woods up above, the impressionistic, expressionistic use of what's there, the abstract design, the counterbalance, the edge making, the minimal use of pastel in a dance with again, whatever the underpainting is. So the tactileness, the economy, it just a joyous celebration of permission to work towards all those goals.
This piece is by Mark Price. It's called Journey, and he's with the Left Coast Pastel Painters. It reminds me of Pastel Pixels.
Well, I got to meet Mark for the first time at our previous brick and mortar show up in Tacoma, and he had come out, he had a piece in the show, and introduced himself, and I got to meet him. And just an amazing person when you meet him, to talk to, the sincerity of who he is as an artist in his journey. And I was very fortunate. When I met him, I said, you have a piece in the show? And he said, yes. And I said, well, show me your piece. And so we walked over, in a small piece like this, and every bit as innovative as this piece. And I became so enthusiastically excited, and he felt that, and this mutual electricity between the two of us, because I went, I'm so thrilled to see somebody thinking differently with pastel, to push the medium. It's our profound purpose, all of us who love this medium, to keep it vital in the future. And that is not about remaking the medium. We can work as classically as we've seen in this gallery talk. We can work as expressively as we want. We can choose our subject matter, but to also put the medium in the hands of the next generation and say, make it your own. Think differently, think outside the box. And this artist does that. And I think that him hearing that from several of us, and then getting into several shows, has hopefully given him that courage to stay on that path, because he's going to deal with a lot of rejection at times too, because people are going to scratch their heads and when they look at this. And I see everything. I see abstraction, I see contemporary, I see that different attitude. And then again, being Richard, I can see a landscape. I see a sky, I see hills in fall blazes, I see a reflective lake or pond or something. But that isn't what the painting's really all about. It's just gorgeous, you know. What a kaleidoscope of excitement.
Yeah, it's wonderful. This piece is by David Bramald, and it's called Winter Hedgerow. And he's with the Society de Pastel. I'm going to completely blow this, but it's this is Pastel Society of France. I'm not going to attempt to say it in French.
Yeah. Well, and that was, again, a thrill after I'd selected this, to see that David was representing the Pastel Society de France. And they, you know, are very, of course, historically, pastel comes, as we know it, out of France and Italy in the form that we have it today. On a personal level, this piece is beyond amazing to me. It's the type of painting that I appreciate and hang in my home. It makes me introspective. I love literature and music and paintings that are not sad, but have a little bit of a, for lack of a better word, almost a bit of a melancholy.
Mhm.
And so when you see trees that have lost their leaves, we know we're in that dormant time. It is the wrapping ourselves up against winter or the elements that are out there, and a bit of that kind of Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff walking on the moors, lost in our own thought. So the subject matter was just stopped me totally. And I went, oh my God, I want this painting. And then I took even this digital image and I blew up sections. And I would encourage the audience to do the same, because what you begin to notice is the mastery of subtlety in this piece. This painting is a symphony of subtlety. It holds everything that pastel is capable of doing in a representational painting. This artist holds in the palm of their hand. Subtle use of edge, texture, color echoes, just wowzer, wowzer painting.
Yeah, this piece is by Lorianne Signori, and it's called The Beauty of a Brush Creek Morning.
And this piece has all of the stuff of the previous piece with tremendous economy. I've known Lorianne a long time. I've watched her work evolve. I've challenged her at times to tell me why in her work that what it was she wanted to communicate. And man, has she found that voice. And Lorianne's very connected to scenes. She goes back over and over and over and over again. She's evolved recently into more memory painting, which is a good lesson for all of us to realize that really what you're painting from is what lies in here. No matter what you're looking at in that moment and technically painting, you are bringing who you are to it. Your belief system, what you see, and what you feel. And the more that you hold on to those memories and those experiences and then find the tools to communicate that voice, you see it. And it can become very economical. And this is one of her small little pieces. I'm sure it was either a memory painting or done on location. And it just exemplifies what I just said.
This is the last piece, and it's called Hodgepodge, and it's by Corey Pitkin, and it's just beautiful. Just takes your breath away.
Isn't it? You know, and you know, the other jurors commented on this piece, and many people have commented on this piece. I'm a huge fan of Corey's work for many of the same reasons that I said about that landscape. Corey brings that same introspectiveness to his figurative work. And it isn't about, it is not about sadness. I mean, I really am lacking the word. It's a bit the poetic in the prosaic, you know, that there are just these things that we witness that don't have to be postcards to be beautiful to paint. Mm-hmm. And Corey, again, brings that to all of his figurative work. In what he does, and a tremendous mastery of technique in a bridge to classical, and yet with a modern attitude. Mm-hmm. His understanding of light and edge and that halcyon quality. But what stood out in this piece of all, and again, a fan of all of his work the minute I saw this, was not just the kind of intimacy of the nostalgia we bring to obviously his child, or a child he has a loving relationship with. You feel it, you know it. The child lost in his own thoughts, exploring their own world in what they're putting down on the paper. And so that pauses us again to be reminded of our own wonder as an artist. Embrace that child. But then I get technical. And I go, the power of an artist to compose this scene the way it's composed, everything is really in that upper left-hand corner. Mm-hmm. It's all there, and it works. It works because of controlling design. And again, subtly manipulating everything else in the painting to make it work.
Yeah.
And that is the sign of, again, a master. And as many of these artists are, we are fortunate to have their work reminding us on a daily basis of these modern masters. So, you know, this has been great fun for me. I know, again, as I said, it's kind of my perspectives and my opinions, and I hope it's been helpful sometimes to peel back somebody else's thought process. And I just want to celebrate the whole art community. So thanks, Sabrina.
Thank you, Richard. And I think it's so wonderful to be able to walk through the exhibit with the master and get your perspective on these paintings, because unfortunately in this show, most people didn't get to walk through it. But having this little intimate viewing of some of these wonderful paintings, I think it's a real treat for all the members of the IAPS family and all the member societies to really see the show and have an artist's perspective of it. So thank you so much for doing this with us.
Well, you're very welcome. And what I would just say in conclusion is something a little bit philosophical about it is, if through art magazines or the catalog of this show or looking at these images or any exhibition you can go to or gallery, if you can attempt to go in without prejudice, you know, we are who we are, but look at each piece and say, what is it this artist is trying to tell me? And not be judgmental about it and just always saying like and dislike. It can begin a process of you moving forward in your own work. And it's not about liking everything, but just, if I was in their shoes, what is this artist wanting me to know? Exactly. And how can I grow beyond that? So exactly. Until we can do this in person, I want to thank you again so much for everything you've given to IAPS and the art community right now and all the work you're doing on behalf of Pastelis out there. And to Red for sitting in today with us. She's the glue here at IAPS. So
absolutely.
Until we can all meet again physically, we'll be seeing each other digitally. So
all right.
be well.
Bye-bye now.